Okay, so next we have creating some command factory variable. So we have the constructor function called the factory function called the new. And I bet this is some, okay, we are passing build version variable that we got on the line 52, which I believe could be taken from build flags. So when we are building this binary, we can pass the version. So I bet this is done in this way.
Yeah, we don't exactly know what a command factory is, but maybe we'll find out. Let's see if we can
create some new variable basically.
Yeah.
Given this variable build version, some value that we obtained earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now we create another variable, the standard std error, which I presume we are basically, or errors that will be coming from our program we are assigned to this std. I'm just guessing right now from the names here.
Yeah, there's some, again, this sort of standard Unix API of commands and exit status. There's also a thing called standard output and standard error, isn't there?
Yeah.
And standard input. So there's these three things which are sometimes called streams, which basically again just means pipes. And when you run a program in Unix, if it prints, if you call fumped println something, that will go to whatever your standard output stream is, usually the terminal. But you can redirect it to other places using the shell and so forth. You could redirect it to a file, for example, couldn't you? Same with standard error. Why are there two output streams, not one? Well, you could imagine some commands produce output, but there could also be an error while they're working, couldn't there? So sometimes what you want to do is run the command, say send all your output to this file, but if there's an error, I want to see that. Don't mix the error logging up with the actual data that you're producing, because I certainly don't want that mixed in with my data, and I want to see it on the terminal. So you can send them to different places, but by default they're both the same place.
So we are redirecting standard output and standard error to basically one stream, right? To see all the output in one place, correct?
Well, it sounds like there's something like that going on, isn't there?
Yeah.
So this command factory thing, which we don't know about yet, that's some struct, presumably, I'm guessing, because it has a field called IO streams, which is that these are the things that we're talking about, and one of those is called error out. Don't know whether that's standard error or standard out or both. Maybe it's two of them combined. Who knows? But we're creating some standard error variable from that, and these are predefined variables in Go in the OS package. So os.std out is whatever, wherever the standard output of your program is going to go. And it looks like this wraps that in some way, but let's find out.
Yeah, now we are checking on this IO streams if the color output is enabled. So if it's not enabled, we are setting up, okay, we are disabling basically color output.
Yeah, you could imagine that maybe, different terminals can do different things, can't they? Or if the output is going to a file, it wouldn't make sense to try and produce color codes, but on a terminal that would be all right. So we could guess this is something about if the place that we're printing to is somewhere that supports color, then let's do color. But if it's not, there's no point. We'll just get a bunch of what looks like line noise, ANSI control codes mixed in with the text. So we have some survey core.disable color, which is Boolean, and we set that to true. Don't know what survey core is. again, maybe we'll find out. But of course, this is a huge repo, right? Vast project. So there will, of course, be tons of things which we have absolutely no idea about and probably never will know. And that's always the case when we're working as programmers, isn't it? Usually the reason we're reading something like this is we just need to use it for something, and we were already a bit impatient and fed up because we're just like, I just need to do what I need to do. Don't make me wade through screens and screens of code. We actually get quite good with practice at just identifying certain things and just saying, I don't care about that. I don't know what it is, but it's presumably not relevant to what I'm interested in, so I'm just going to ignore it. Again, that's a skill, isn't it? Like being able to quickly pick out those bits which are relevant and those which aren't. And that comes with practice.
It's like jumping between different layers. If I don't need to go deeper and check what is happening inside the module or different function, I just can skim like we are doing right now, and just be satisfied with the logic that I understand.
Yeah, exactly. Erin, what do you think about this, Erin? Do you read programs like this for fun, or do you find that you have to read through packages that you want to use, and do you feel like you have this skill yet of sort of zeroing in on the important bit and discarding other stuff?
I don't think that I'm good at that yet. I definitely feel the need to go figure out what each and every piece means, and I think it's nice to take part in this and to watch these videos, because experience seems to be the best way to learn when you can just kind of ignore, and when you maybe do want to dig deeper when it's relevant.
I think that's right. Well, definitely, the more we look and think and cogitate, the more we'll learn, definitely. But we just don't always have that patience, do we? Or maybe we just don't have the time, or we're just not here for learning. We just want to quickly identify which function is it I need to call. And that's okay, but I think your approach is absolutely right in that when you don't know what isn't relevant, assume everything is until you know it isn't, right? Because otherwise you could miss something really important. And again, that's something where I think, the newer you are to the language, the more of an advantage you have. Because your brain isn't already kind of full of filters saying, this isn't interesting, I don't care about this, it's bound to be irrelevant, and so we're not so much at risk of losing stuff to those filters. So fine. Where are we in this slightly tangled piece of code? We're sort of we're still inside this if statement, aren't we?
Yes. So we decided right now that we that we don't have color enabled. Sorry, that we have color enabled, and when we have color enabled, we need to have a look into the line 68 right now, right? So we are overriding survey's poor choice of color. Okay. Whatever it means here, right? So
we don't know what survey is, do we? Is that some import?
No. Survey core. So I bet some business logic from some packages here, but I have no idea right now.
Yeah, Anusha, could you scroll us back to the imports section for a moment and just see if we can figure out where survey core is coming in? Apparently it's something important. Oh, right, so that's not from this project.
Oh, yes, it is. It is core, line 14, but they renamed this.
Yeah, that's some third-party library called survey. Don't know what that does. Probably millions of people out there shrieking at the screen because they know, and it's really obvious, but I don't. But we could sort of guess that we already know it's something to do with color output. And the comment says override the poor choice of color. So maybe this is saying, whatever the default colors are that it has, the GitHub people don't like them. And they're going to override them. Let's see if we can deduce more about it from what this code does. So what do we have here?
We have some template function with color. Okay, so survey core templates in color. So I presume we have some map here. or could be function, no, color, and we are assigning the value of the function.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea what this is about as yet.
Style, okay, some styles, so
Let's
could
keep
be
looking.
color style. Okay, we know that we will return some strings, so this could be, okay,
Yeah,
and then we are switching on style, right?
Yeah, we have another function literal here, don't we?
Yes.
So
yes.
we saw one of these before with the go statement, where it was like, go run this function concurrently. This is assigning some function to some variable, isn't it?
Yeah. And
So maybe,
inside, no, sorry, go ahead.
well, maybe the name of this gives us a clue. So there's something called survey core, which sounds like sort of global config for this survey machinery, doesn't it? And there's something called template funcs with color, which looks like a map, as you said, because it's got square brackets and then it's got a string in there. If it were a number in there, it could have been a slice, but only a map can have strings in square brackets, so it must be some map. And its value is of type this func, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's sort of, this func is going to be called by someone, isn't it? Under what circumstances do we think it's going to be called?
Yeah, I suspect we have some map here that actually the key is kind of color and the value is the function that will be executing. I'm just trying to figure out this construct on the 68 line.
Yeah, it's a bit mysterious. It may become clear, or we may just have to live with partial ignorance. That's
exactly.
often the case,
you need to be comfortable with unknowns.
But at least we know roughly where we could sort of categorize this stuff, as we say. It's something to do with colored output, isn't it? So it's not it's clearly not part of talking to the GitHub API or dealing with repos or anything like that. It's basically about presentation stuff, which is fine. That's important.
Yeah, so then body of this function, we have this few switch statements. So it depends on the value of our style variable passed to this function. So we have, just in case we have white, we will be assigning, checking, function colors. Okay, so we are basically checking if I would say, probably terminal supports the 256 colors.
Yeah. So we're seeing command factory IO streams again, aren't we? Which we know is something to do with the input and output. And we previously called a function called color enabled, which we can guess means, do you support color? And this sounds like a more detailed version of that, doesn't it? Color support 256, 256 colors, something like that. I don't know what the alternatives are, but that's clearly one of the kinds of color you can have, isn't it? So if that's the case, then...
If that's the case, yes, we are returning some string created in FMT's printf method.
Yeah, now what's all this? Because this looks complicated, doesn't it?
There are some colors. I don't remember this. I saw this many times, and I was actually dealing as well with setting up colors for terminal, but I don't remember details.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know that there are certain, some characters are just letters and numbers and printable characters, aren't they? But there are other special characters which are sort of magical in that they change how the text is presented. So like, new line is an obvious one, isn't it? It doesn't actually print as any letter on screen, but nonetheless it starts a new line. And there are others. And if your terminal supports color, there are some non-printing characters you can print which will set the color of what comes next, isn't it? So you can say like, whatever color you're printing in now, please print the next thing in green. You print that control code, and it does nothing, but it ensures that any future text will be shown in green, and then maybe you change it to something else. So that looks like what this is doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whatever these magical values are, that's just, that's the ANSI control code for white, presumably, so since we're in this switch case, that's case white, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it looks like, here is some function which is going to get called with some style as the argument. The style can be something like white. We don't know what the other options are, but there's just a default case here, isn't there, which says for any other. So let's try and think this through. So if we are called with white, then the first thing we do is say, do we have 256 color support? Because if so, here's a very special control code just for you. If not, so at line 74, if that wasn't the case, then just return some ANSI.colorCode function, which presumably produces something similar. Just return the color code for the default color, whatever that is. Alternatively, if the style was not white, but something else, then return the ANSI color code for whatever that is. Sounds sort of reasonable, doesn't it? We don't know every detail, but we've got enough of a sense of what's happening here, isn't it? As we're basically figuring out what control code should we print to the terminal to print whatever color style we've got selected. And I guess, does this mean that the GitHub client itself has multiple color themes? Is that sounds a bit like overkill, but maybe it does. Who knows? I've got to be careful what I say because, some of my students are very senior GitHub engineers. So I can't, we can't be too critical, can we? But perhaps one of them had a couple of free hours and thought, what this command line client really needs is color themes. So we have that. That's great. Okay. Anusha, would you like to read a bit? Should we look at the next bit from line 81?
Yeah. There's a comment, enable running GH from Windows File Explorer's address bar. Without this, the user is told to stop and run from a terminal. With this, a user can clone a repo or take other actions directly from Explorer.
That's interesting. I'm not totally sure what this is about, are you? I have never run anything from Windows File Explorer's address bar. But we can guess that it's something Windows specific. So what does the code actually say?
If length of os.Args greater than 1,
Yep.
and os.Args of 1 is not an empty string, then Cobra.mousetrap help text equals empty string.
Right. That's a bit opaque, isn't it? At least we can try and figure out what this is actually saying. So first of all, what about OSargs? Do we know what that is? Or is that new to us?
This is the slice of arguments, right? Passed to command line when we are running the program.
Yeah, this is another bit of that traditional Unix API, isn't it? If you're a command line tool, people can run you, obviously, by typing your name or the full path to the program, but they can also give you arguments by specifying extra things on the line. Like if you run the echo command, that just echoes nothing, but if you say echo hello, it'll print hello. So that's what OSargs is it would be not just hello, in fact, but it would also include echo. So OSargs is the complete command line, starting with the program name, and then each whitespace separated argument will be a separate element of this slice, because it actually is a slice. So as Anusha said, we look at the length of that slice and we say, is it greater than 1? So since we know the program name is always there, it's always at least 1, isn't it? Can't be 0. But if it's greater than 1, that means there were extra arguments after the command name. So if there are, and then we look at OSargs element 1, and we know that's actually the second element because slices start at element 0 because reasons. So you know, with the first half of this if statement, we're saying, is there an OSargs 1? Isn't it? Because if there isn't, no point looking at it. In fact, we mustn't, because that would panic the program. Trying to access a slice element which isn't actually there just crashes, which would be bad. So first of all, we're like saying, is it okay to look at OSargs 1? Apparently it is. Okay, let's look at it. Is it empty string? If not, that means there is something there. So do this, set cobra.mousetrap help text. Who knows what that does? Not sure where the mousetrap comes in. Something to do with the ever popular Agatha Christie play. I don't know. But it's nice to know how that machinery works. Anyway, isn't it? Even if we don't know exactly what this is for. Let's continue. Keep going, Anusha. You're doing a great job.
Root command root.new command root. So we have passed command factory, build version, build date.
Yeah, we've seen these arguments we've seen before, haven't we? So we created the command factory, and we know that's something to do with being a command. And we got build version and build date from some magical source. And then there's some root.newcmd root, which takes those things and it gives you something back, which is a root cmd, isn't it? So I think this is kind of like, you know, a lot of commands, it's just you run the command and that's it. It maybe has arguments or whatever. But sometimes commands have multiple verbs, don't they? Like you could think of git, like the command is git, but then you don't just say git something, you say git checkout or git clone or git commit, you know. The second word there is a sort of a subcommand or a verb. And the gh command clearly has the same, doesn't it? Like I don't know what those subcommands are. I presume it's similar, you know, gh, clone, commit, push, whatever. So there is some root command, if you like, which is gh, and we will presumably attach subcommands to that or something like that. If we're using Cobra, which it looks like we are, that's a popular library/framework for making CLI tools, and that's how it works. So, all right, should we see what's next?
CFC, error := command cmd factory.config.
Yep. Yeah, that's great reading because you're saying exactly what's there, not your interpretation of it. And then we check that error.
If error not equals null, if there's an error, so basically we are fprintf standard error. So to the standard error we are writing the error message, failed to read configuration.
Right. So we're calling, so the CMD factory thing, which whatever it is, we got that from that constructor that we called earlier. And apparently it has some config method, which we call. And from the error message, that sounds like it's going to try and read some config from somewhere, doesn't it? Presumably a file or the environment or something, you know. Yeah, I presume there's some file somewhere that controls your settings for the gh command. It's probably YAML, right? You know, this is what the world needs, is more YAML. But apparently we're going to read that. And that could fail, of course, because it might not be there, or it might be there, but halfway through reading it, someone unplugged the disk, or the power went out or something. So this failure is pretty straightforward, isn't it? We print that message to whatever standard error is, which we found out earlier, and we return exit error, which is one of those predefined constants, isn't it? So presumably, you know, when you run GH and it fails, and you can say, well, what was the exit status? It was 75. Okay, that means something. It tells me what it was that went wrong, and I could find out by looking at these constants. I could say, Oh, that is, I guess, just error. Not very specific, but at least we know there's an error. So fine. All right, Erin, would you like to read the next bit for us? We're doing great so far. We've got quite a way into this, haven't we? Let's start at line 95.
95, yeah. There's another if statement, prompt, and then another one of the underscore blank thing that we're not going to worry about, I guess.
Yeah, we can guess again. That's ignoring some error, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bad idea. Don't do this. I'll just editorialize, in the background.
So that if that equals, let's see, that CFG variable dot get with blank string and prompt as arguments. Oh gosh, I am a little lost here. Prompt.
Yeah, that's fine. So this is something that not everybody will have seen, so it's great to try and unpack this a bit. So we've seen sort of if statements, like at line 90 we've got if error not equals nil. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's just we have if, and then there's some expression which ultimately evaluates to either true or false. And if it's true, then we do the thing in the braces. If not, continue. This is a little bit different, isn't it? What we've actually got here is we've got if something something something, semicolon, and then a Boolean expression.
So we're creating prompt as the first part of it, and then we're evaluating prompt.
So I don't know if this actually officially has a name, but I call it a compound if statement, in that your normal if statement is kind of if some conditional expression, but you're allowed a special form where it's like if do something semicolon conditional expression, and you can imagine what that something is, can't you? It's probably setting that variable that you're then going to look at in the expression. So you could refactor this and just turn it into more simple Go by just saying prompt comma underscore colon equals cfg dot get yada yada, and then the next line if prompt equals disabled. That would be easier to parse, wouldn't it? But it's exactly the same as this. This is just a short way of writing that, if you like. And I must say I tend to avoid this kind of style for exactly that reason, right? This is, you could say, a less than optimally clear way of writing this logic. Jakub, what do you think?
No, I don't use it, to be honest. I use this construct only when I'm checking for error. And when actually the error is only one expected, the outcome from some function call.
Yeah, I can't exactly say why.
But it's confusing, to be honest, for me. And when I need to spend a few seconds more just to try to figure out what's going on, I prefer like 2 lines more, but have clearer.
Yeah, I think maybe
from top.
Is it because the if is so far away from the actual expression that we're ifing on? That's confusing, isn't it? It's like if, and then a whole load of stuff, and then, by the way, you remember we were in the middle of an if statement? Well, here comes the expression. and the statement part before the semicolon can actually be long. Like long. Like I've seen code where it's like if prompt equals some function call that takes 600 zillion arguments, each on its own line. So we're almost off the screen, and then it's like close brackets, semicolon, error not equals nil. You're like, whoa, wait, what? I completely forgot about the original if statement.
Is there a reason beyond saving lines of code to do it this way?
No, and I think that's a terrible reason. That's not a good reason for doing anything, is it? It's not like we have to pay per line. Lines are cheap. Let's just use a few more to make it really clear. So this is a slight dilemma that I have with teaching Go, and presumably you might feel the same about learning it, in that there are things which people do. It's valid Go, perfectly legit. But it's not necessarily a good idea, There's maybe a better way to do it, like writing a compound if statement as just a statement followed by an if statement. We sort of have to understand it, don't we? Like if we want to read other people's code, we'll need to know what this means, but that's not the same as saying we should write this ourselves when we're coding. And it's important to make that distinction, isn't it? Just because just because you can do something, just because you can do something, it doesn't mean that you should. And that's good advice in general, isn't it? Not just coding.